Welcome back to the Sporting Eyes show for the 3rd of February. I hope you're all doing well. We're just a couple weeks away from the beginning of some of these pre-season games and a little under a month away from the start of the AFL season. So exciting times, and can't wait to get over this pre-season period and get to watch some games again. Talking about games and the length of the quarters especially, our first topic is on Patrick Dangerfield and what he said about the lengths of our quarters. Now, he was on Twitter, he was on the internet, and he replied to a video about Adam Silver. Now, if you don't know, Adam Silver is the commissioner of the NBA, and they've had some rating problems this year, and it's been a growing trend for a while. And Adam Silver was in favour of shortening their quarters from 12 minutes to 10 minutes to align with the trends of us, the consumers of sport. Now, Patrick Dangerfield essentially agreed with Adam Silver, but for the AFL, now I'm going to read and put it up on the screen exactly what he said. He said, "As audiences' attention span reduces, the debate will continue with the AFL quarter lengths. It's time to reduce them. Cue outrage." So I had no problem with this. This is fine. It's his opinion. He's obviously influential in the game, being the AFL Players Association president. But his argument to me didn't make a whole lot of sense, and I think a few people kind of in the similar boat where I am. Now, he said, "Now, I've heard the record ratings attendance argument." I'm guessing he's referring to the AFL breaking the attendance record again last year. "Less games, less play, blah, blah, blah. It's simple, supply and demand. Reduce the supply and the demand goes up." So that's his argument. He's saying that essentially the less football we see, the demand goes up, and that's kind of better for everyone. But the problem is he kind of contradicted himself and worked against his argument by saying that there was a record ratings attendance last year, and it's true. The people going to the games has just never been bigger. It's just unbelievable right now. The AFL must be laughing. And then throw in the TV ratings are incredibly strong. The grand final was huge again. It helped it was Brisbane and Sydney, so we get basically the whole of Australia watching. And I even use the example of the elimination final. Now, Hawthorn's kind of a big club, but they're not Carlton, Collingwood, West Coast or Richmond in terms of membership. And the Bulldogs, well, they're one of the smaller clubs, probably a bottom six for membership and people attending. And that game, that elimination final, got 97,000 people to come. Now, it was the only final in Victoria, and there's a few other side things with it, with both sides being, pretty hot in the back end of the year. But if you told me 5 years ago Hawthorn and the Bulldogs would get 97,000 at a final, an elimination final, I probably would have laughed. So it just proves that the AFL has never been bigger, and Dangerfield's argument here of a supply and demand doesn't really make sense, because the supply's never been higher, we've never had more games, and the demand's never higher because people are going and watching it on TV at just record rates. So I don't quite get what Dangerfield's getting to here. Now, the reason I did bring this up as well is he is the AFL Players Association president, so he has a lot of influence, probably talks to Andrew Dillon and some of the higher executives, I'm guessing a few times a year in some meetings. And I do wonder if this is something he will bring up. Well, I think any change will happen. I highly doubt it, because why would you change something that's working so well? Another reason Dangerfield might have brought this up is, who would this benefit the most? Say we went from 20-minute flat quarters with time on to say 17 or 18 minutes. Well, obviously it would benefit Dangerfield. He's an older player. He's still a superstar, still influential, but he has to pick his spots now. He's more of a burst player, and obviously the less time there is, the more his bursts are impactful. So it was interesting. I don't agree with Dangerfield, and I don't quite get his logic, but we'll see how it progresses in the future and if this is something the AFL will look at. Now, speaking of time, it hasn't been a good time at my Western Bulldogs, and there was more bad news last week. So they're up in Queensland right now at their camp, but there was some news that Adam Treloar will miss 8 to 10 weeks with a calf and probably the first 2 or 3 rounds. And Jason Johannesson has done a bad hamstring again, no surprise, and he's going to be out for a similar period of time, maybe a couple weeks longer. Now, I want to be honest on this show. At the end of 2023, I probably would have traded Adam Treloar from the Bulldogs. There was some interest from the Gold Coast. He'd come off another solid year. He was pretty good, consistent. But I thought the Bulldogs needed some change in the midfield because he just wasn't the same Adam Treloar as he was at Collingwood. I think the injuries, the soft tissue injuries, had caught up with him. To me, he was basically another version of Liberatore or McRae at the time. Just a ball hunter, ball gatherer, can get 30 disposals, but his line-breaking pace that we saw at Collingwood had kind of disappeared. And obviously he proved me wrong. 2024 was by far his career best year. He was kicking a lot of goals and was very good in big games. But there is a by the way. And that by the way is that what happened at the end of the year? Well, his calf went. It kind of flew under the radar, but before the last game of the year against GWS in Ballarat, they weren't even sure he was going to play with that calf injury. They were in the rooms looking at it. He ended up playing. He had 24 disposals. It didn't do too much. And the following week against Hawthorn in the final, the week after that, because of the bye week, they weren't sure he was going to play again. He played, had 28 disposals and kicked a goal. But those numbers are a little bit deceiving because his impact wasn't that great and he wasn't alone. So I'm not picking on Adam Treloar. The whole point of this is his body has always been a concern. I thought 2024 he'd turned the corner. He'd kind of found his role next to Liberatore. Ed Richards had helped him because Treloar can feed the ball out. He can always get the ball. His clearances were fantastic last year. His raw averages for clearances and contested possession had never been higher. And he was phenomenal. He'd found his role, mainly to do with, I think, Ed Richards helped him out a lot. But his calf went, and obviously he hasn't healed from that. So that's a big concern for me, for a player who's 31. And it's just a big concern. Now, JJ isn't as big as a concern. I wasn't sure he'd be in the Bulldogs' best lineup. I still don't think he will be when he comes back, because I think we have Fraser, Bailey Dale, and Lockie Bramble, and even Taylor Duray are probably all ahead of him. But it is depth that's lost, and the Bulldogs have Kennedy, Sanders, Gallagher, even Harms for that midfield depth. But are either of them good as Treloar? Well, obviously not, because he was All-Australian last year and had his best season. I really like Adam Treloar. I was so impressed with him last year. He definitely proved me wrong. And hopefully he can come back and the club can manage him over these next 2 to 3 months. And the other bit of news was with Jamari Ugle-Hagan. No surprise, he did not attend the camp. Haven't heard too much about him since. It's obviously not good news. Seems to be at the club less and less frequently as all this news has come out. So no real updates on him. Hopefully we can see him at some time this year, but I think it's getting clearer and clearer that we won't be seeing him probably for the first half of the year, but maybe the entire 2025 season. Time for a new segment called This or That. It's pretty simple. I've got a few different prompts here, and I'm going to pick one of the options available and tell you why. Now, the first one's to do with Luke Davies-Uniacke, who was offered a 7-year deal for North Melbourne. He's still undecided where he's going to play, and he's obviously out of contract. And so is Chad Warner. So between the two, who would I rather have for 7+ years? I'm going to pick Chad Warner. He's a couple years younger, not that that is a huge deal, but I think he's a better midfielder than LDU. He's kicked more goals, and I think the biggest reason why for me is his motor. I think his motor runs higher. LDU can kind of come and go, not only between months of games, but also in game. He can have a really good quarter here, and then he'll struggle and only get 3 or 4 possessions in a quarter. So I think Chad Warner's motor runs higher. He's also been an All-Australian last year, been in the squad before. LDU has won the best and fairest, so that's something Warner hasn't done yet. But I'll take Chad Warner right now if I had the option between the two for 7+ years. The next option, who will be better at Hawthorn, Tom Barrass or Josh Battle? I'm going to pick Josh Battle. I think he's versatile. I think he'll start in defence, but at St Kilda he would often play forward. He even played on the wing for a period of time. But Sam Mitchell likes versatile players, so I think that'll favour Battle. And it's also going to be interesting to see how Tom Barrass does as the sole defender. He obviously was playing with Jeremy McGovern, who's one of the great defenders of modern time, one of the best intercept defenders. So Tom Barrass, he should have Sicily next to him although I do expect Sicily to play more games forward or more time in games forward. So that'll leave a lot of responsibility up to Barras. We know he has some issues with his back. So with all that taken into account, I'm going to say Josh Battle will be a bit better for Hawthorn. Next one. Do you think Melbourne's culture has improved? Yes or no? Hard to tell looking from the outside in, but I've seen a lot of positive from Melbourne this entire off-season and pre-season, so I'm going to say it has improved. How much? I'm not too sure. Jack Viney spoke to the media and said they went to a camp at Bright and really tried to connect with each other again, opened up a lot more, and I think that has helped. And a lot of the videos I've seen on YouTube around Melbourne, the group looks happy, a lot of positivity, and Petrarca, he's obviously their best player, really invested, looks really fit, strong and powerful. And Clayton Oliver, I'm still not sold that he's entirely fit, but has he got some of his burst and power back? Sure. And we've had no off-field dramas with him, which is a fantastic sign. And I think that shows that Melbourne's culture has improved, even if it's a little bit this off-season. And the final one with Adelaide. Who out of Neil Bullen, Cumming or Peatling will be the best next season? I'm going to pick Alex Neil-Bullen. He's a known commodity. We know he plays that high half forward role. He comes up to the stoppage. And I think, like he did with Petrarca at Melbourne, where he essentially would cover corridor side for him, he'll do this exact same thing for Isaac Rankin, and that'll be so important for Adelaide. Will he put up big numbers? I'm not too sure, but Neil-Bullen's one of the better role players in the AFL, and I think he'll do that for Adelaide. Now, I do think, on a quick note, that the player with the most potential is James Peatling. He had some really influential games in the midfield for GWS at the back end of the year. Go watch the game against Brisbane at the Gabba where they came back to win. It was an opposite of the final. James Peatling had an outstanding second quarter, got a lot of the ball, a lot of important clearances. So I think he has the highest potential, but I'm going to pick the known commodity in Alex Neil-Bullen to have the best year in 2025. Up next, we're going to have a look at Collingwood and how they're managing some of their star players. Well, things seem to be progressing well for Collingwood, at least on the field. Off field, they lost another member of their recruiting department. But the good news is Jordan De Goey is back and seems healthy. He had groin and abdominal issues last year, and his campaign was finished by that hamstring, a really bad hamstring tear, which was mainly due to him not putting enough loading into that groin and the hamstring overcompensating. So he said he should be ready for opening round and is hoping that he can play obviously the rest of the season. And Nick Dacos is the other. He seems to be over that plantar fasciitis that they were managing a few weeks back. He's been in training doing some of the match play stuff, but plantar fasciitis normally doesn't go away by itself. It's one of those awkward injuries. So we'll see how they manage that, but he seems to be okay for now. And that's the word that I'm going to use for Collingwood this entire year, managing. How can they manage their players the best? I had them number one in the Eyes 8 heading into the year. That best 23 on paper for me makes them the best team heading into opening round. But the big asterisk was their injury management and their depth. If they got bad injuries early on, especially cluster ones in the midfield, forward line or defence, I'm not sure they can cover 3 or 4 players going down. If they don't manage their players well enough, they might get tired, especially some of the veterans, towards the back end of the year. And then their depth, well, I don't think they have great depth. You could argue it's maybe bottom 1 or 2 in the entire competition, especially with their crop of under 23s and guys like that. So that's the big what if with Collingwood. If they can get that right, I think they will be okay. And De Goey is the kind of personification of this. Does he look after himself as best as he could? No, but he makes up for it in big moments. He can often cruise through the home and away season, which I think I'm fine with, and Collingwood fans are too. But his final stuff, in 2018, when they made the grand final, he kicked 12 goals in 4 finals, including 3 in the grand final where he was just dominating. And then in the grand final run, he dominated again. He took over that prelim final, 34 disposals, 10 plus clearances against GWS. He kind of willed Collingwood over the line that day. It was the greatest game he's played. And then in the grand final, he was actually the highest rated player, kicked 2 clutch goals and obviously kicked the goal to put Collingwood in front, and they never lost the lead from that point in the game. So if they can get all this right, Collingwood, especially with their Goey, who's their match-winning player, I think they'll be okay, but it's not something that you're going to feel comfortable with for the entire year with Jordan De Goey. Now, another player similar to De Goey is GWS's new recruit in Jake Stringer, and there's a couple perspectives I want to go over about him. Now, he's been raved about at the Giants, great work ethics, been training well, fitted in seamlessly. But I am glad that the Bombers got rid of him. I always felt like they were held captive by his ability to win a game or two off his own boot. But the reality is he did nothing for the other 20-odd games of the season. He had a spike year in 2021 where he was a top 5 rated player by Champion Data, and that just perfectly coincided with him being out of contract, and that's basically been the story of his time at Essendon. Whenever he's out of contract, he seems to play a string of games, and when he's in contract, he definitely doesn't perform nearly as well. So I'm glad Essendon got rid of him, cleared the books, and allowed someone else to take his spot. But on the other hand, Stringer might be that type of guy where in a really good team, which I think the Giants are, he might be able to blossom because he doesn't have as much responsibility and he can kind of make up for his lapses here and there. Now, he can be a bit of a flat track bully. I'm going to give you some numbers from last year. He kicked 4 goals against Hawthorn in round 1. Remember, Hawthorn did lose the first 5 games of the year, so in the context of the season, obviously Hawthorn were not that good at that point. Kicked 4 goals against Richmond in Dreamtime, 5 against West Coast in round 15, and 4 goals against Fremantle at the back end of the year when they were in their 4-game collapse to miss finals. It's a lot of goals he kicked against teams that were either not very good or struggling at the time. But I'm not sure he gets into this GWS lineup in the forward line. I'm going to name you 8 players. Hogan, he'll play. Cadman, you'll think, will play. And you think Riccardi's a good shot. So out of those 3, the bigger forwards, he probably has to battle with Riccardi. But you get to the smalls. Daniels, Green, Jones, Bedford, and Thomas. I'm not sure how Stringer gets into this team because he's definitely not better than Daniels or Green. And I think they'll play Jones, and Bedford I think will probably play forward again after experimenting with kind of some tagging time in the midfield. So it's crowded. There's only so many spots. You can probably only have about 6 forwards in the modern game. Normally have 5 on field. One of them moves up into the midfield at that high half forward role, and then one on the bench. So they're raving about him. Apparently he's playing well, but I'm still not 100% convinced he's even in their best lineup or he'll stay in there. We know the Giants like to play a high transition style of game plan, a lot of running up and down, something that Stringer does not like to do. So I'm not convinced, despite all the reports, that he's even in their best lineup right now. Thanks for watching the Sporting Eyes show for the 3rd of February. Have a great rest of your Monday, and I'll see you guys on Thursday.